Daniel, this is your expertise because you are a former lead contractor, and we've done some coverage in East Chicago, Indiana. You've done some coverage in Flint, Michigan. So take it away, because I think this is something we all have to deal with, and it's our good friend lead.
Yeah. Oh, and just for the record, I'm currently still.
My bad.
Okay. So this case was this one. This is why the story really struck out to me. This is a case story that I found on CNN about how the amount of people that are affected by lead poisoning is 10 times higher than they originally anticipated. Now, I think of lead in kind of several stages. First, lead is a very, very toxic element to the body. What it does is when you ingest lead, especially at a young age, it's less dangerous as you get older, but it's still dangerous. That lead, when you take it in your body, because of how atoms function, your body confuses lead with calcium. And so one of the biggest places that lead will go is where calcium goes. And where is that? That's in bones, and which will leach back into the body, and it's in the neurons of your body, which require sodium and calcium at the gates for the neurons to work correctly and fire correctly.
So primarily your brain.
Your brain, but the bones have effect because it makes bones weaker as well. But mostly, it's the brain. The brain has what's the word I'm looking for? The brain has, as you know, you're growing your brain, especially when you're a younger child. When your brain's growing and you have lead in your system, it starts replacing all these calcium channels in your brain. And what that does is it's the equivalent of like looking out in Chicago right now and just randomly just putting a giant 30-foot boulder in intersection, just a random intersection. And that's what lead does. It just causes the entire chain that causes information to move in your brain through your neurons to just stop at that neuron, wherever it is, that has that lead in it. So it just dead ends your nervous system. And if you just kind of think about that, it's like if there's one intersection in the city that's like a giant boulder, everyone can go, well, don't go where the giant boulder is. It's no real issue. Just go around it. Here's an alternate route. But if every other intersection or 10% of the intersections, it's very hard for anything to happen effectively. And the same thing happens in people's minds. So what happens? It lowers IQ. It causes aggressiveness in people. It has a huge amount of other health issues that will increase your risk of mortality, and just general decreasing how you can live a life and how well you can live it. And I always go back to mentally, when we had leaded gasoline from the 60s until we banned lead gasoline, everyone that was around back then had a lower IQ because they're constantly breathing in lead. And again, what are the traits? It's more aggressive, more it's more what's the word I'm looking for? We think if people just act, they react quicker than they should.
They're agitated.
But the point with that is that at that point everyone's breathing in leaded gas all the time. So everyone had lead poisoning in America only a few years ago.
Right.
And now what the study's saying is that they estimated for a while how much lead was in the environment, and now they're saying about 212,000 deaths occur every year due to lead poisoning of one form or another.
Daniel, I want to ask you a question, and you've said it before, but I think it's very clear that the audience needs to understand it, and perhaps again one more time. What is the safe amount of lead that technically humans maybe are allowed to be exposed to, and then what's the type of lead that's right now in East Chicago and what they're being exposed to?
So it's the same. I could rephrase the same question.
Yeah.
How much anthrax is a safe amount to have in your body?
Exactly.
How much?
But
it's a toxin.
It's clear it's a toxin, but
and it's a heavy metal toxin, which is very, very dangerous. You don't want to have any lead in your system. Sadly, there is lead in the environment, and it's places it is naturally occurring in the environment, and there are places where it's man-made concentrations of lead in the environment. Going back to even paint, one thing people don't realize with children is lead is sweet like chocolate. It tastes great. Going back to the Roman era, they had very bitter wine, and they sweetened their wine
with lead
briquettes.
And they drank out of lead cups.
Yeah, and that's the acidity is leaching all that in. Actually, the reason people in the medieval era thought tomatoes were poisonous for so long is because they would cut their tomatoes on pewter plates, the wealthy would, and that would leach the lead from the pewter. Mm-hmm. Lead has been with humans as a valuable metal and a toxic metal since we've been doing things. I mean, the plumbing system here in the U.S., many countries, Roman era, all done with lead, and it always has these very terrible effects.
And I just want everyone to know, too, I'm a huge fan of Roman history, particularly the Julio-Claudian dynasty. I know it's a little bit off subject, but with Caligula, the mad emperor, everyone always says that he was crazy. During his first year, he was okay. It was only when he had this huge, massive, brain hemorrhage or something like he went into a coma, and then he just did a complete 180.
You have to realize with him, very young person, he was like 18-ish, give or take.
18, maybe mid-20s. I mean, he became emperor at a very young age.
I think he became emperor at 18, but one thing he was known to love was Roman wine.
Yeah.
He would drink 8, 10 bottles of it a day. And so if you have a still developing brain, because, a brain of a male develops all the way up to about 25. Again, lead gets less dangerous over your age. It's still always dangerous, but the effect it has and the nervous system, since nervous system develops fully, there's less chance for going in. It will just go more or less to your bones or pass through you.
Yeah.
It'll still go. But so if you have a kid that's that age who's drinking that much lead, what do you expect to happen? I mean...
Yeah,
it was
going to happen sooner or later.
You have a guy that no one can say no to that likes to drink all the time, and he likes to drink what is poisonous.
Yeah.
This is what lead does. This is how lead is. So now going back to this, there are people in the U.S. that are still completely poisoned by lead, whether it's from the water that they're drinking, but it's more likely... Water is a big issue. We've covered water for a while, but the vast majority of the incidents are from infrastructure that still has lead in it, mainly paint. So if you are poor and you have to live in substandard housing, and that housing is an old building that no one wants, that's falling apart, that's dilapidated, and if it's built before 1978, before it was illegal to use lead paint, it's going to have paint in there. And one thing paint does that has lead in it, it's very good at turning into dust.
Yeah.
Much more than acrylic paint is. And so then you're just breathing in lead dust. And although paint isn't like 100% lead, it's a few percent lead, you're breathing in dust of heavy metals. And especially if you have a child that's growing up in those conditions, they're going to be breathing in lead. They're going to be interacting with lead. The area around these buildings are going to also have lead from that same paint.
Right.
Because it'll just go into the ground. So if you're playing, you get dirt on your feet. This is what we had when we went to East Chicago. You then get lead in your system because it's just everywhere in the environment. And that's the areas that are super, super impacted. And we now know that just in water, there's over 3,000 towns and cities that have high lead levels somewhere in their water, because that goes back to what we said in the previous story. No one's investing properly in adequate infrastructure.
Oh, exactly.
Because if people decided... hey, if the people are so big on creating jobs, how many jobs are you going to create if you have to redo the piping in every major city because it's ancient and needs to be replaced?
Mm-hmm. Well, another thing we have to take into account, let's look at Chicago and our public schools. And some of our Chicago public schools have, it's been recently found that there's lead in schools' water. So here in Chicago, a major metropolitan city, supposed to be a rich and powerful city, apparently, our students are being exposed to lead as well in their water because of a lack of proper investment into the infrastructure into our city. And this is mostly affecting low-income minority communities.
And even beyond that, it mainly does, but it's to the point that we don't care enough that it's even richer communities. There are a few wealthier neighborhoods all over the country.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's going to get to them, too,
I'm
sooner
saying
or later.
It's already there, just in lower numbers. But then again, there are lower numbers of very wealthy communities.
Yeah.
So my point is, this goes back to, again, go back to that bridge story we just covered. It's the country not valuing infrastructure, even though infrastructure is one of the most important things to building a successful country. The U.S. became the envy of the world after World War II, when we did these massive infrastructure programs, and even before, during the New Deal era. Mm-hmm. And we put huge amounts of effort. At the time that we did the highway construction with Eisenhower, that was the largest earth-moving project in the history of the planet. Now China's beaten us with several projects that have done more than that. And this is something that isn't being focused on in this current era because it's not profitable to do. It only benefits citizens, and it only benefits people that aren't contributing. There aren't enormous plumbers unions that are stronger than some other corporate entity that can pay more money for something else. So if you are fighting, if you're a government budget and you're being fought over by 100 different groups, the way we've configured the country, the way that the country's been configured, I should say, the people that win are the people that have the connections to politicians, and that's not plumber unions lobbying to get pipes fixed.
So on the study, I have a couple of questions for Daniel. So it concludes that about 412,000 deaths every year can be attributed to some kind of lead poisoning. And it's a 20-year study of 14,000 adults from across the United States. And one of the things I thought was interesting is that we know that there is a link between high blood pressure and lead contamination. But one of the things they found was that there's also a correlation between lead poisoning and cardiovascular mortality, so heart attacks.
Right.
Was that something you were aware of? I found that surprising.
Well, I mean, I haven't studied it in a doctoral sense to really understand what every part of the body. I know that the nervous system is heavily impacted. I don't know if that cardiovascular disease is due to, because there's like its own unique nervous system that's in your heart. I don't know if that's the part, if it makes the heart less efficient, or if it's that because it's leaching into the body, it's attaching to things, and it just makes those things weaker in the same way it would in the brain in a different way. It doesn't surprise me if someone said, lead also increases cardiovascular disease. My response would be, oh, that's interesting. That makes sense. Can you tell me more about it? Mm-hmm. So if they're saying that doesn't surprise me at all. I just don't know specifically how that plays out.
I found that interesting, though. And I wanted to point out one other thing in the study is that they talked about people in sort of the 90th percentile of lead contamination and their mortality rate compared to people in the 10th percentile and below. And for their study, what they found was that the 10th percentile and below had a lead concentration of 1 microgram per deciliter of blood. And in the 90th percentile, that figure was 6.7 micrograms of lead per deciliter of blood.
And that goes to show you just how toxic it is, that the difference between 1 and 6.8 is so great. But you have to remember, how would it factor in? So you have obviously if it increases cardiovascular disease, well, obviously that decreases life expectancy. If you're someone that has it to start with, by just aggregate numbers, you're probably already poorer. And if you have it affecting your mind, and you can't sit in school, you can't think as easily because those paths are blocked, well, then you're going to have a harder time graduating school, which of course makes it harder to live. And if you do, you're still going to have a comparative disadvantage with the way the brain is functioning due to the poisoning long term. I mean, there's so many different ways that all these traits in lead play out in society that makes whoever has it worse off than someone who doesn't. It increases aggressiveness. So if it's a minority community, there you go. That's an increase in people that will get killed or shoot people, because if you're getting killed because if you're not listening to police in a way that whatever it may be, you get my point with that. And then if you are easier to draw to anger because of that impulsiveness that is caused by the lack of channels in your brain, so you're more likely to turn a situation that could not de-escalate into something that escalates into someone dying. I mean, you can think of all these different scenarios, how having your brain affected in that way, having your body affected in that way, having grown up where it's concentrated would cause so many people to die. And I think beyond just the deaths that are reported in the study, we have to think about, that's just, in a sense, deaths are always the tip of an iceberg. That's the worst outcome. How many people have lesser outcomes where they don't die, but they live with it? Again, going back, it's even though it's still widespread, it's nowhere near as widespread as it was in the U.S. when we had leaded gas in the air. Mm-hmm. So even though all this is happening, and it's still terrible, and we still have all this infrastructure that's falling apart, it's still preferable to when we just were breathing it in consistently and it was covering every surface. So it's better, but it's still worse. We're not putting in money where it needs to be put in.
And it's another example of lack of oversight and lack of caring at the state and federal level, and it's up to us now, again, to step up and get people in office, in power, that can protect us and make sure that this amount of exposure of lead goes down. I mean, it's going to be difficult to get rid of this amount of contamination from our environment, but if we don't put effort into it now, the long-term effects are going to be devastating.
Here's the thing that I really wish government would care about, and I feel like if you took money out of politics, it would. What is the economic loss of that many people dying every year in the U.S.? How much investment has been put in through schooling? How much through taxes, through infrastructure that they use? How much lost productivity is there that they will never do in their entire life? If again, just as a prison example, if someone's working and they're able to work every year, they're putting money into the economy and the GDP grows. So if you have, again, I go to Walmart just because their margins are ridiculous. If you pay someone $20,000 a year at Walmart, they're making the company about $80,000. So that goes away first. And then if they're dead, they're not producing anything. They're going to affect any family they have around them, make that. It's just a cascading effect. So what is the economic cost of doing nothing? That's what's not factored in. They don't factor in what's the cost of 500,000 people dying every year, what that does to the country, what it takes away from the country, what it takes away from the economy. But a lot of people care about the economic arguments. So they look at what they do is they look at the cost of replacing pipes and fixing this, and they go, wow, that's a lot of money I don't want to spend because it might look bad and hurt my chances to get reelected, and people might not be happy that I'm increasing their taxes. But what they don't factor in is, and again, this is due to the way that politics works now, and it's more important to be reelected for most politicians than it is to actually serve your area, that they just say, I'm not going to be the guy that does it. I don't want to risk it. And they don't factor in, and then maybe they can't because the benefit that they would draw would be after they leave. I mean, unless they're going to stay for several terms over decades, they're not going to see the benefit of what they do. But everyone's so short-term. Everyone's thinking so quarterly about issues like this. Of course they can't see a long-term solution. It's the same reason that NASA can't fly anywhere, because every new administration wants them to do something different than their predecessor. So they gear up to go to the moon, then they're like, oh, no, we're going to gear up to go to Mars. Oh, no, wait, now we're going to gear up to launch a satellite. No, now we're going to go back to the moon. It's expected. This is a expected, reasonable result of a country that's configured like ours. It's short-term thinking with money put in places that has short-term benefits while ignoring long-term benefits and long-term costs of short-term actions.
It's neoliberalism at its finest. It's a neoliberal establishment that both Democrats and Republicans in power use. It's a system that they like. It's a system that their donors, who are Wall Street investors, large companies, the top 1%, and the banks. And this is the system that they built, and it's up to us, again, to get actively involved and vote them out. Because if we don't, this is going to keep on happening.
You're watching Hard Lens Media.